Good morning, everybody. Although my job title is Deputy Haven Master Conservancy, I am effectively the port hydrographer. So, yeah, Conservancy is a strange word for some people, but I'll explain that later on. Right, without further ado, that's what I'm talking about today. I'll just give a brief overview of who we are, the Bristol Port Company, and then I'll be touching on survey, dredging and monitoring fluid mud. Now, those three are all interrelated, so I will be jumping around a bit, so hopefully you'll bear with me. The Bristol Port Company is owned by two men. They are the shareholders. We're not part of a big port group in the country at all. So if those two chaps decide to go ahead with a project, then we can get straight on with it, generally, with environmental legislation and stuff like that. But yeah, we are a private company. Before it was privatised, it was a loss-making company run by the council to such an extent that people who lived in Bristol had to, part of their taxes was to pay for the port. But since 1991, we've been a profit-making company. We've invested a fair bit into the ports in that time, primarily with joint ventures. And you can see the increase in shipping and the revenue as well. So just to give you an overview of where we are, Avonmouth, we've got in the region of about 7 kilometres of berths there. And at Portbury, we've got around about 2 kilometres of what we call deep water berths. Because it's an impounded dock, we can hold vessels in there of up to a draft of 14.5 metres. So if we have the facility to pump the dock up if we need it, and obviously if we're keeping on top of our dredging programme. So this is what the port system looked like in 1991 at privatisation. Avonmouth is the old port that was first started in the 1880s, and most of the land was pretty much used there. Portbury was completed in 77, but since that time, with the investments, you can see how much it's changed. You can a lot of people who drive up and down the motorway past Bristol see an awful lot of cars there. We are the largest car importer into the country. 75% of the vehicles we import, 25% are exported or transshipped. So we do deal with a lot of vehicles, but we do deal with a lot of trades. So Portbury Lock, when it was completed in 1977, it was the largest lock in Europe. I believe the Dutch and in Germany here there are now larger locks, but Portbury is 40 metres wide, and it's quite an effort to get vessels in of 40 metres beam and 14.5 metres draft. So we have to get them into a very strict timetable, and a couple of vessels have been so wide we've had to take the fendering off one side of the lock to get it in. Not only has the ship got to get into the lock at a certain time, the water that's in the lock's got to get out around the ship as well. So I'll be touching on that a bit later. Right, what is Conservancy? People have asked that many times. There's the Oxford English Dictionary definition. So translated from English into English, we have to provide a safe harbour. So we are designated as a competent harbour authority, and under British law we have certain duties. All except the last one here are impacted, or rather fluid mud has an effect on those items. So this is classic port survey. These are the duties we have to do. There's many more, but this is the nutshell. So there are our port limits. We have some 160 square kilometres is our port area, and also the tidal River Avon up to the city of Bristol, which has the small old docks. They're not commercial. So we have a big area. Interestingly, just for a bit of clarification, the River Severn comes down to pretty much where our port limit ends there, and then the Severn estuary comes into that point. So effectively, the Severn estuary there is the Bristol Channel. And certainly in the winter, we do get the storms that roll off the Atlantic, so it's certainly fairly lively down in that area, especially since we have our pilot boarding area here. This is where the pilots board vessels and disembark them. So it can be lively down there for them. The vessels are boarded here, and it's 23 miles to get them up to here. So what have we got survey-wise? Well, we're very fortunate. We've got our own 20-metre survey vessel, Isambard Brunel, a good Bristol name. She was built as a relief pilot vessel, but she was too heavy and slow for the pilot, so great. She's permanently fitted out with all our survey kit, and she's a very good survey vessel. And we have a small, almost 8-metre cheetah catamaran for doing the shallow water work. And if we need to get to site quickly, we can get about 25 knots out of her if we crank it up. And we're also very fortunate that we have our own survey coxswain as well. Martin not only looks after all the craft, he can also work on the dredges. He drives the big floating cranes and stuff like that. We also have a couple of other chaps who can stand in at short notice if possible. But having a survey coxswain who knows how we think, knows how the surveys are undertaken, is a huge advantage. So, how do we perform our depth measurements? So there you go, there's a blast from the past and DSO 17. But very faithful tool and works very well in our waters. We have an Odom CV200 there. We have another Sound 420. We've got various frequencies that we use on Isambard for our transducer there. That's 210 33 kilohertz, high and low frequency, which will become clear shortly. But although there's some years with this kit, they still work very well and very good for our environment. The CV200 we've taken on recently, and that is used primarily for performing our density surveys, which will become clear later. There's our multi-beam. We got that 12 years ago now. No, 10 years ago. Titanium housed. And it's hydraulically operated. Unfortunately, the video won't work on here, but it's just a button up in the wheelhouse and we can deploy that in about 4 seconds. And it comes out through purposely built moon pool and just below the hull of the vessel there. Fantastic bit of kit. If we need to service it, we can take the top off and lift it out with a crane. So great, we don't have to necessarily dry dock the vessel to work on it. Fantastic bit of kit, and this has been a very faithful workhorse for us down at Bristol. And the titanium housing is helpful. We haven't smacked it, but just in case. Right, here's classic multi-beam for our backyard. Here's Portbury, here's Avonmouth. This is where we're based. And the King Road. This is where it gets interesting for pilots, interesting for ships. This is when the pilots at Portishead Point here really have to work very hard with the tugs and vessel masters to get the vessels either into Portbury or into Avonmouth. There's a gap here of only 350 metres, which is very close to this very mobile shoal here, and the shoals of the Welsh grounds as well. Just to make a note of that blue area there when I show you the next slide. So interesting environment, and we've got some rather large sound waves off Portishead Point there. So this is the multi-beam survey for 2014. See the changes. This is what we're dealing with. So it's very mobile. Areas here that were dry in 2013 are now wet 7, easy. Some of the smaller ships that go up the River Severn to Sharpness often cut through there if they're a bit late on the tide. So very mobile environment. And that blue area that was there in 2013 had gone in 2014. In 2013 we'd found that 1.3 million cubic metres of sand had moved in 3 months. We don't know why. Went back through the records, it hadn't done that for 20 years. It's a very fickle area, this, which is why our multi-beam system is very, very useful tool. Now down at Portishead Point here, the ships come very close to the shore here. It's also a very mobile area of seabed. And with this image here, you can see the sand waves here have a wavelength of about 100 metres, 3 to 4 metres high. We have recorded that these sand waves can move a metre in an hour, like rows of terraced houses marching along the seabed on the spring tides. When we're onto the neap tide cycle, these just diminish down to little sound waves of about, well, little, of a metre or so, and then back onto the spring tides, and this sand is all mobile again. And there we go, a good faithful Atlas DSO 17 trace of just the sand waves there of Portishead Point. And the DSO 17, before we had multi-beam, worked very well because both the high and low frequencies, as you can see there, can digitise the seabed very well indeed. So just to touch on the tides that we have at Bristol, they are brutal. The Canadians have higher tides, but we do have big tides. This is Avonmouth entrance with a little sand dredger leaving last week, and that was 6 hours later. So you can see there with the figures, the ranges that we have, and with big tides, big currents. We do have an 8 DCP meter, an RDI workhorse on Isambard, and we have recorded up to 8 knots mid-flood, mid-ebb in the past. Not only do we have the big tides, the River Severn drains about 20% of the UK land. It starts in Wales, and certainly during last winter with the storms we had an awful lot of fresh water coming down. So that mixed with the salt water, we were most of the time working in brackish water. So, and when we do the temperature salinity profiles, I've yet to see a difference in the speed of sound of more than 2 meters a second between the surface or the bottom or anywhere in the water column, because it is that well mixed. The purpose of today's talk is the fluid mud. Now we do have some challenges with fluid mud, and this image is pre-Google actually, but it just goes to show with the colour of the water there, the mud that is in suspension. It's been calculated that there's around about 30 million tonnes in suspension on the spring tides. And we dredge about 1.5 million thereabouts each year just from the entrances of Avonmouth and Portbury, which is a lot of material. Both those entrances silt up at about 10 centimetres a week, and it's not just the top of the fluid mud we're measuring there. This is the navigable horizon or the navigable bottom, which I'll touch on later. So we do have some pretty brutal siltation as well. And that's where we declare a navigable horizon of 1.2 tonnes per cubic metre. And that is what we chart at the end of the day. So, mud, the 4 forms of mud. Briefly, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a geophysicist. But yeah, we've got it forms in 4 stages. So with the fluid mud around here, the silt-laden water rather, and then you've got a bit of fluid mud there. Those scars there are draghead scars from a trailer suction dredger. The flocculated water is when the clusters start to stick together, and then it starts to flow like a liquid in fluid mud, and then the firm mud, as you can see here with the scours on the top there. So we've got all types of that mud in our port and in our entrances and in King Road. So the purpose of this image is just to show that you cannot determine where that navigable horizon is just by echo sounder alone. So the 210 return, as we affectionately called in Bristol, the top of fluff, and then the harder bottom or the marl, which is a very hard rock. So this is Avonmouth entrance, this is Portbury entrance. Here we dredged in Portbury entrance about 3 days before this trace was acquired. And you see there about 2.5 metres of fluid mud has filled that, no effort at all. So there's the navigable horizon determined from our density systems on Avonmouth entrance, and there we go for Portbury. So you cannot tell from the echo sounder trace alone where the navigable bottom is.